Hey all, this is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on the show. Are medical bills slowly eating away at your savings? Today we're exploring the hidden connection between sound money and sound health, and why inflation is stealing more than just your purchasing power. If you've ever wondered how the monetary system affects your ability to eat well, move your body, and take control of your own healthcare, you're going to love this episode. Joining us today is my friend Jon Gordon. With over a decade in healthcare and deep roots in the Bitcoin community, Jon is bridging the gap between preserving your freedom and supporting your health at the same time. Now, if you'd like to stay up to date on all the cool live events and in-person stuff we have coming, music shows, we have get-togethers, retreats, and much, much more, be sure to sign up for my newsletter at abeljames.com. That's abeljames.com. You can also follow me on Substack, abeljames.substack.com. Look forward to seeing you there. We also just launched a brand new app if you'd like to check that out, as well as our Club Wild community, and I highly encourage you to do so. Be sure to visit wildrx.com. All right, in this episode with Jon, you're about to hear why inflation steals your time and how that directly impacts your ability to prioritize health, family, and rest. Bitcoin is a health savings technology. How decentralized philosophy and breathwork both lead back to individual sovereignty, why to prioritize owning your health data instead of letting corporations sell it, and much, much more. Let's go hang out with Jon. Welcome back, folks. Jon Gordon is a friend, a strategy consultant, yoga teacher, and co-founder of Sound HSA, Nos Fabrica, and the Chicago Bitcoin Collective and Fork and Coin. With 10 years in the healthcare industry and a key member of the Bitcoin community, Jon is helping people to bridge the gap between sound money that preserves our freedoms while supporting our health at the same time. Thanks so much for your generous spirit, Jon, and thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me, Abel. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's amazing. Every time we connect, there's something cool that we dig into, but it was actually Paul Millard of the Pathless Path who introduced us, I guess, a couple years ago now. And it's incredible how many times our paths have crossed since then. And it's really exciting to watch all of the different projects that you've been involved in and spun up over the years. But why don't we just start kind of with a bit of a question, which is almost everyone is experiencing the pain of fiat inflation right now. Not so many, though, understand what's happening to cause that, or why the system itself is imploding and enabling this process to move forward. So what's the relationship as you see it, specifically between inflation and those implications and our health on an individual level? And then maybe we can talk about a population level too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Abel. And really what inflation is money printing, right? And it's expansion of the money supply. And what that does is it creates more of a scarcity, and we're not necessarily producing other goods and services at an increasing rate, right? So when we increase the money supply, the price of those goods and services has to go up. And the harder the asset, meaning the harder it is to produce, the more the price in dollar terms is going to increase. And I think everyone really started to experience that more so during COVID, right? We printed 40% of all dollars that were ever created since the Federal Reserve was instantiated in 1913 and over that COVID time period. And so that acute shock of the money supply caused our inflation. And ultimately what that does is steal people's time. And that has a direct relationship with everybody's health. Right, when you are now forced, or families are forced to needing dual incomes and spending less time with family or on your own health just to get by and pay for food and gas and other energy, other essential goods and services that we need as humans to live, kind of our basic needs, let alone the wants and desires, you're forced to also become an investor, and you have to decide and pick, right? Because if you can't save in the money, right? If our dollar is our money, but it's losing purchasing power year over year, you have to, or otherwise, if you're not outpacing inflation, you're guaranteed to lose purchasing power, right? And so people find things like homes or other collectibles or stocks or gold, precious metals, which has served as money for thousands of years, and now really Bitcoin, and where I've landed, and you've landed as well, Abel, and seeing what sound money can ultimately bring us as individuals, sound health. Because as you start to save in a money that can't just be printed, or we have a fixed supply. There's 21 million Bitcoin that will ever exist. We're already at 20 million that have been distributed fairly through proof of work over the last 17 years. And will continue to be this not only money, but a network for us to connect and pay one another peer-to-peer cash. It enables us to improve your purchasing power over time, right? And if you measure things then as unit of account with Bitcoin, it becomes really clear, right? If you wanted to buy a house 10 years ago, the average house of a Bitcoin, average price of a house in Bitcoin was about 600 Bitcoin. Now it's 6 Bitcoin, right? So in 10 years, your purchasing power is increased by 100 times. Meanwhile, you have the price in dollar terms more than doubling, right, of the median price, $400,000+. And so if you don't have time for yourself and to breathe, or to kind of get into your eat healthy food, get higher quality food, right, you have the whole movement of towards less quality under inflation. Matthew Lisak's book Fiat Food explains this really well, and that's one of the places we connected in Austin at our having party a couple years ago, and had over 100 people there, I think, really digging in and understanding the deep connection that we have between fiat food, or food that have been stripped of any nutrient density and quality, going through monocropping, and ultimately 60% of all food being consumed as in this country ultra processed food. And that lines up with 6 in 10 having a chronic condition, really, of in the American population. So I think you don't have to look really far to see all the connections, but you certainly have to be open-minded. And I think those that have gone down and started studying Bitcoin, or at least looked around and said, why is the price of ground beef going up by so much, or ribeye going up by so much? Because we can't necessarily just print more cows. And you can't, right? There's a process, a biological process that the cow has to go through to eat grass and be big enough and ready for processing. And we have centralization across all these different industries, and ultimately, as an individual, you can have that. You can make the decision to then save in the money that can't be printed, and simplify, right? And not necessarily need to pick stocks and think, oh, what's going to go up or down in the future, but what can't be printed? Well, Bitcoin, you can't just print more of it.
And a lot of people would say, but what about the volatility? Which is a fair point, but you also need to compare that to everything else and assume that that doesn't experience volatility. And what we've seen, regardless of fiat currency recently, is the same thing happening. These 30% drops in a couple of days in precious metals and in currencies, obviously. And the way that I think about it is, well, it's just insane, as you brought up, that we would need to save in a currency that is rapidly losing value in a relatively predictable but also unpredictable ways. So all of the mental effort and stress that comes along with the learning curve of trying to be an investor for everyone or every family on an individual basis is just absolutely insane. So this other model, though, harkens back to older systems that did work well, where you could work and then in exchange for that work, store that value for a time, and it's protected to some degree. But maybe you can just riff on the volatility bit for a while there too, because it is a fair point, regardless of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and the volatility you're referring to is really when you measure Bitcoin in dollar terms, right, as your unit of account. Because if you look at Bitcoin doesn't care about anything else, right? Bitcoin is software, Bitcoin is code, and it's a network that you can opt into. And so that distribution schedule of Bitcoin is set. But as we've increased the supply, starting with 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes, and 25 and 12 and a half, now 3.125, each of these halvings you have, and the demand is shifting, and you have much more money printing on the dollar side, you have 50%, 60%, even 80% drops, right, in that value when there's a ton of demand and people are really interested, driving the price, and then boom, now we have a drop. And so certainly the volatility of any good, as you're mentioning, and you have even way larger, you have moves in the gold market in the last few months that are bigger than Bitcoin's whole market cap, right? Bitcoin stores around $1.5 trillion worth of value. Gold is now over $30 trillion. So it's been having these huge swings, as you mentioned, measured in dollars. And all of that is very volatile because what we're using as our unit of account is increasing in supply at 7% on average per year since we went off the gold standard fully in 1971 and went to this pure fiat standard of really a debt-based system fully without sound money backing it. So kind of at the headline level, that might scare people away when you see a big drop and you think that the dollar is more stable. But if you zoom out and see, well, actually, you're guaranteed to lose purchasing power in one way. Or in the short term, if you try to time the market, certainly you could end up on the wrong side of the trade. But if you're looking at it from a long-term savings perspective, a low time preference, and thinking towards the future, anyone that's held Bitcoin as money for 4+ years has increased their purchasing power, right? And so 4 years of time now, that even gets us into 2022, that was the bottom of the last really bear market, or when we were at 16K, 17K, really when I was starting to work deeply in Bitcoin and healthcare and towards Bitcoin adoption. Obviously, we spiked and went all the way to $126,000. Now we're settling in that $80,000 per Bitcoin range. But any money, as you mentioned, as it gets adopted, first it starts as something collectible and interesting and maybe different. Maybe it was salt, it was cattle, and precious metals, gold, silver, copper. Moves into something that you can store value with. If I just hold this thing for 10 years, it's relatively scarce, it's durable, it can bide the test of time. And then you move into more of a medium of exchange phase for that good, where you can transfer it. It's acceptable, it's fungible, but maybe it's heavier, so it's harder to travel with, and there's only so much of it you can bring, and there's certain types of transactions that that money is more well suited for. And then eventually, as that good is more distributed across the population, everyone starts thinking in terms of that money or that good, right? And that's the unit of account phase. So certainly, at least in Bitcoin's adoption, we're well into store of value and even into medium of exchange now with tools like the Lightning Network. But certainly farther away from everyone thinking in terms of Bitcoin, in terms of satoshis, right? And you have perfect divisibility then. You need money to be divisible. There's a great book called The Seventh Property I recommend folks reading that dive into these 7 properties of money by Eric Yakes. But that divisibility, there's 100 million satoshis or units in one Bitcoin, right? So while one Bitcoin, you might say, I don't have $80,000 to spend on a Bitcoin. Well, you can buy 1,292 satoshis right now for $1, right? It's divisible, and you can start saving even a small amount of dollars, putting that into Bitcoin, and then seeing really the magic over time. But the magic is just math, right? And it's supply and demand, and it's a free market, and really more of that free will that individuals have on how you then want to choose to spend your time. And certainly, again, the tie into health is having time to work on yourself or others instead of being in that kind of that constant grind or fiat rat race that we see.
Yeah. And applying that longer term lens to all of this, you can see that now we're at a higher low, essentially, right? Where for a while there, in the years that you referenced, the catastrophic low would be 10 grand or 15 grand or something like that. And now, and once again, people declared that Bitcoin and crypto was dead and all of this stuff, but specifically Bitcoin was dead. And that's come up many times over the years. But now, interestingly, when it's crashed to 60K, that's catastrophic, or 70K or 80, whatever. And over that time, I mean, it hasn't been a long time since 2022, say, or 2023. And also the way things are looking, a lot of the trajectories might change in how intense they are or in magnitude, but they're still kind of going in the same direction. And that's what you really need to pay attention to when you're saving for the long term. And especially when we're talking about our health, it takes savings, whether we're talking about sourcing good food or taking care of yourself or fitness and medical concerns, all this. It really takes that over time. And it is a responsibility to build that for yourself and your family and your future self so that you can take care of things down the road. But another aspect of all of this is all of these people who are racing to save money for these medical costs that could be upcoming in this traditional system. They're shuffling it into these other things like houses or like land or real estate or businesses or stocks or what have you, or even gold and silver. But many of these things come with carrying costs or come with the complications of needing to store and secure them over time, which isn't usually accounted for. For example, my wife and I very much considered and were close to buying land up in Colorado for many years, kind of as a place to go or maybe a place to live and build someday. But the layers of complication that were underneath the land for the mineral rights and then on top of it for all of the layers of property management and the ways that you don't own it, you just kind of like have a license to access it almost, but then these rules to build are enforced upon you so that you need to spend certain amounts or build with certain materials. All this stuff was so complicated, and also the property taxes and that sort of thing. Even if the land had gone up in value, which I think over the past few years it really hadn't, it still would come with this carrying cost. And once again, with gold and silver, you need to store it and secure it. With houses, they come with all sorts of different costs and insurance and fees and property taxes and all this stuff. Maybe you can just talk about the carrying cost and the burden of securing alternatives, because I think that's worth bringing up, and a lot of people don't really think about it until they're just punched in the teeth by the fact that it needs to be done all of a sudden.
Yeah, those are all great points, Abel. And when you look at from the macro level, there's about $900 trillion of value that's being stored, if we measure it in dollars, right? And several hundred, over 100 trillion of that is real estate. A couple hundred trillion is our sovereign debt, right? Money that countries owe each other, and that we see the interest rates continue to spike because no one wants to hold that debt. You have too much debt, not enough dollars, right? So to your point, whether that's land or stocks or gold, you can splice up those hundreds of trillions of dollars of wealth, and there's been a huge monetary premium put on those goods, such as houses, that we need to live in, right? We're humans, we need some kind of shelter. And if you look at, again, the price of houses, I gave that example earlier, continues to increase
As do their
in dollar
fees and
terms,
taxes.
right? And then
Right.
in terms of fees, yeah, we recently got a house, unfortunate, and yeah, dealing with whether it's the HVAC or you have your, outdoor, or you have anything, all the insurance, you have the property taxes, right? There's a lot of these annual fees, certainly, and you've thought folks wanting to get in deep and to go to the Airbnb market or the rental market, but you realize that there's actually a huge burden, and a house should be is a consumption good. It depreciates over time, as you mentioned. You need to put in more money to keep it operating at a level that you would prefer. And folks have now gone and used those, or big companies have bought up homes that drives up the price even further. And so you have this stalemate now, even very much in the housing market, where there's way more sellers than buyers, and the buyers and the costs of getting a 30-year mortgage now, as the interest rates go up on the 30-year debt, that's less in the control of the Federal Reserve in the short term. That's really more so set by the free market. That rate now is spiking upwards over 5%, leading to more than 7% mortgage rates. And so the price, that monthly price you have of paying off the debt of your house, is significantly higher for that same house than it was for someone 5 years ago that went to get a mortgage when we had artificially put interest rates at near zero. And that's where we get at ultimately, what is this driving at? It's the price of money. Who gets to determine the price of money? Today's world, we have that's based on the dollar as the global reserve currency. And that as that power, though, continues to wane, you still have 60 to 70% of all transactions globally, happening in dollars. There's this artificial, more so demand for dollars globally. And we have the 12 unelected officials in a room that are deciding the price of money. That's the interest rate, right? And so they don't necessarily know what a rice farmer in Indonesia needs, but that rice farmer has their suppliers and then their customers, right? And everybody has a different market for whatever good or service or whatever value you're providing in the world. But when that volatility you speak of is really ultimately the price of money, if we don't have a stable price of money, it creates all sorts of downstream impacts. And then absolutely, as people look to have other assets just to hold, they're not ideal as money. A house isn't ideal as money. There are carrying costs. There are things that you need to do. And gold isn't ideal either because it's centralizing, and to defend it or have a serious amount, you need a security guard, and it's heavy and you need to ship it. And then it's hard to verify that it's really there, right? Do we know that the gold is really in Fort Knox? There's a lot of trust involved in that. And that's what always has, in my journey, has pushed me back to Bitcoin, because in Bitcoin, you don't have to trust, you can verify. And there's an open ledger, and we can see all the addresses that are or UTXOs, unspent transaction outputs, that have a certain amount of Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin can only be spent if you have the private keys and you sign a transaction, right? And so that actually now gives individuals the property rights that are lacking in a lot of these other alternative assets. Even as you mentioned, what kind of property rights will you get over land, even in the US, and versus the jurisdiction that is running it. So it's unfortunate, because what that's done is it's priced out these harder assets, at least relatively harder, that people need to live, such as food and shelter. And now gas prices, obviously always one that people pay attention to. And with gas prices consistently over $5 a gallon, and you have a disruption of supply in the Strait of Hormuz in the Middle East, these are real impacts that, we're living through it now. And I think it's maybe hard to see day to day, but people are feeling it. But we're in like a broader, cycle of really the crisis period now that I think we'll get through, certainly as humans, as we've always done. But to your point too, the cycles of history, they seem to repeat and come in different forms. But I see there's still a ton of opportunity to build and create the world we want to see.
I'm curious for you, Jon, because you're a high performer in all sorts of different areas. You also have a family and lots of responsibility in your life, but you still are out there getting after it. And I'm sure one of the secrets to that is the way that you've trained in yoga and in health, and how that's been a passion as an athlete as well. So how has that entered into your life, either in the past or in more recent years? How does that keep you going and keep you vital?
Yeah, I always loved sports growing up. I was competitive by nature, playing football, basketball, baseball, and after college and intramurals, and you're getting in the workforce, it's kind of like, how do I still find this balance, or stay fit, stay well as you're getting a little older and starting a family. And so, yeah, for me, certainly running was a big one. Ran a couple marathons and for me, that was a big time to listen or just focus in, connect to my body. And then absolutely yoga was a huge part of my journey. Did a yoga teacher training in Bali about 4 years ago now. So during the pandemic time, my wife Erin and I were traveling and had an opportunity to do yoga teacher training, studied Himalayan Kriya yoga, which is the lineage of Yogananda. It's an autobiography of a yogi. If anyone's read that book, is a really amazing stories. And so digging in and learning, studying Kriya, teaching Kriya, tapping into my own body, my own breath, I saw a lot of connection between actually Bitcoin and yoga. And as I was studying Bitcoin and its decentralized nature, its connection to energy, this really universal truths, I think connected very much with yoga, even having kind of a mysterious origin story. Adi Shiva Yogi compared to Satoshi, and you have several thousand years of yogic philosophy and kind of way of being and way of living that I saw resonating in the way that Bitcoin is set out and operates. But ultimately, it lies back at the individual level. So I think yoga, running, eating well, certainly living in Austin, Texas, and being around other amazing humans who are also motivated and wanting to better themselves and their families and connecting more to the land. It was a huge part of my journey as well over the last few years. And I think and we had the opportunity to live nomadically and travel and also now have roots. And I think experiencing and seeing other ways of living, it's just really eye-opening. And whenever you do and you transact, you come across someone else, it's like, oh, there's an opportunity here maybe for understanding the local money and what have other people experienced here. And then also from a health perspective, there are people who are really connected to the land that we've seen in Asia and in Africa and in South America. And so it's trying to taking those lessons, internalizing them, and ultimately putting that into action day to day and trying to build companies and build opportunities and create and connect with others that are also on the path. But I think it certainly starts at an individual level and having just those practices or those routines or those things you can come back to reground if maybe you're feeling a little stressed or moving too fast. And breath work, yoga, and running are all things that I've found to be really great tools over the last few years.
Anything that's in the breathwork realm that other people could apply? Or is it more advanced stuff generally?
No, I mean, it can be very, very basic and just connecting, tapping into your own breath. Maybe it's just a deep inhale, lower belly into your upper chest and releasing and doing that. And maybe some box breathing, counting to 4, inhaling, holding it at the top, exhaling. It doesn't need to be fancy. Certainly, there's other practices like holotropic breath work that I've participated in that are interesting in ways to kind of go a bit deeper. Maybe have a bit more of a spiritual experience as well, just with breath work. Are really powerful tools. And then in Kriya, it's a lot of energy, and you're moving down your chakras and you're releasing negative energy from the body through a mixture of kind of more intense breathing plus movement and doing some movement as well. So you're not just laying, flat on your back with your eyes closed and breathing really hard. You're also moving, but then you're observing. So you will do a practice for about a minute and focused on a different area, different breath work, maybe a little Kali breath. So you're releasing, getting everything out, and then taking time to observe. And even doing a practice like that for an hour can be pretty life-changing, and certainly building those practices is getting into fatherhood and have less time to do that for myself. But then there's other ways, you can still connect and have those spiritual moments too. But it doesn't need to be fancy. And that's also that corollary to Bitcoin is like, it's opt-in, right? We're all human and no one can stop you from going inwards and tapping into your breath and really noticing how you feel. Similar with Bitcoin, you can spin up have a wallet and have your own keys and hold your money and be sovereign from a financial perspective.
How about yoga and applying some of those practices to running? Did it inform that much?
Yeah, I think it's a great balance. Certainly when you're running and you're moving your body that aggressively or running for 2, 3, 4 hours in a row, it's mostly mental. I mean, you need to stay in the physical, but you have to decide you want to do it. And breath work is absolutely a huge part of it. And it can be healing as well. Actually, the night before I ran the Austin Marathon in 2023, I went to, shout out to Allie B Yoga in Austin, went to her holotropic breathwork class. And I'd been feeling like a bit of nagging in my knee leading up to the race. And during the holotropic practice, you're breathing really aggressively, which is very much what I was going to be doing the next day when you're running and you're really exerting yourself through a full marathon. And I also sent like healing to my left knee during that practice. And then boom, the next day, my knee was great. And I noticed like when we got to, mile 20, 21, and I really needed to dig into the breath, it's the same breathing. Right, because then you're actually in holotropic, you're breathing through your mouth when normally you want to breathe through your nose, but that kind of hyperventilates you, and that's what's happening when you're really exerting yourself, such as running a marathon. And so, yeah, that connection and being able to go between the two of staying really in my body and not having any other, really negative physical impacts by combining it with yoga. The first race I did in Jerusalem in 2022, it was fully pouring, downpour rain, 40
Oof.
degrees, and yeah, it was tough. But I had trained in other conditions, even really in the heat, as I'd been running a lot um, in Bali before that. So, but just being prepared and going with the flow. Like I didn't expect to show up at the race with my feet sopping wet before even running, and that's not necessarily something I'd trained for. But also with yoga and having the mindset of like either way, I'm gonna find a way to do this, but also understanding the physical limits of the body and where I'm at. Um, I think is a really good, a strong combination for anyone that's just looking to better themselves individually.
Yeah. A, a season of challenging yourself, at least, of some of those endurance events. That was one of the most transformative, seasons of my life in many ways, and was a springboard to like starting the blog and this podcast and all those other things. Because I think once you kind of persevere and make your way through something as ridiculous as a marathon or a triathlon, the other real life things just pale in comparison to just the raw, like dig deep ethos that you needed to come to throughout that process just to finish and get there. Now it's also important. It can be addictive, right? And some people kind of get stuck in that loop. And there are different paths for everyone, but I think one that we share is that we both have done that, but didn't make it like a whole thing forever, because that's also not necessarily the point of this process. It's to challenge yourself, and when you do that, you learn so much. Like I learned so much about health and running those marathons, because you need to manage your glycogen so you don't bonk, and you need to figure out which electrolytes need to be bolstered up or spackle the gaps in your nutrition, because you're burning through it way faster. And so you also learn which things make you fatter in the stomach because you're just eating so many calories. And so what were some of the things that you learned from like revving at high RPMs for a while that now you apply to life?
Yeah, it's a great question, and love to hear more of your early marathon stories as well. Yeah, I found that just eating real food, and actually what I was fueling up with, now that I remember in Jerusalem, were dates. So I was just eating dates like during the race. I think a lot of
That's
the
awesome.
other like yeah, powders or energy things, yeah, maybe give you a little spike, but aren't as sustainable, and but maybe they can help a little bit in the short run. But yeah, I think dates as a fuel source and just real food was really important for me. Definitely electrolytes, whether that's Relight or another, just to get the other magnesium and sodium and everything else you need to replenish. Coconut water for sure. Being in places where you can have access to coconut water, I think is really an amazing life source, whether that's Costa Rica or you can get it in Whole Foods and without added sugars. And as that becomes more ubiquitous, my daughter calls it gonga water. It's
That's so cute.
that's her favorite. So yeah, I think those, and then certainly real, fueling up with beef. Obviously, there's carbs and other things you might want to load right before the race and just have the energy to do it. But I think one of the runs I did that was really inspiring was I ran from Ubud to Canggu in
Oh, wow.
Bali, which a lot of people would think is like kind of crazy. It's like a 45-minute motorbike ride and 20 miles, and you're just stopping, like you kind of have to stop along on the side of the road to get some water, because it's really, as early as I left, I didn't leave early enough and it's getting hot. But then ended up getting all the way to the ocean and had a couple coconuts, and was like, wow, this is to choose, took like 3.5 hours, but just running and seeing what, the just the life there is really, really eye-opening. Um, so those types of runs, like I think that was like the last kind of, or the big prep run that I did. Usually build like once a week, build another mile, from 13, 14, 15, and kind of had those milestones. But you don't necessarily need to run a ton, like it's maybe 20, 30 miles a week, 35 miles a week, right? But it's the time. So even now, like I don't have the time to do that. But at that point, I was in a point of my life where I did have the time to go for a long run like that and challenge myself and run run from Ubud to Canggu.
Amazing. So what's it like applying these health principles and keeping your own routine that you know works for you against the challenging conditions of living in so many countries around the world? Because you've been nomadic for a while, like, as you mentioned, right? Like living in Costa Rica is a different thing being healthy there. Whether you're talking about food access or just access to the sun and lifestyle and kind of like going against the grain or not in terms of sourcing your food, that sort of thing, compared to Chicago, right? Like not as much sun, lots of wind, totally different food system. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, my wife and I were living where we got married in 2020, but we were living in Chicago at the time. And when our lease was up, we left and we drove out west and spent 7, 8 months out west and seeing the country. And certainly each winter we've kind of had trips where we've chased the sun, gone to the southern hemisphere, whether that's South Africa and Zimbabwe or Argentina and Uruguay, or a bit in Bali. So getting that sunlight is really important for me. And definitely in Austin, we were spoiled and had great weather, most of the year and had access to more sunshine, being 1,000 miles further south than Chicago. But being near family and having roots here now, we moved back at the end of last year, has been great. But it's connecting, to that local food source. So I was able to find a rancher that I could buy grass-fed beef in Bitcoin, and I found where we could get our raw milk from another local rancher and who has a farm stand. So wherever you go, I mean, especially here in the U.S., right, you'll probably be able to find local food. You just have to choose to seek it out. And so for me, Bitcoin's often been that filter as well, to find a merchant that's selling their good and service for Bitcoin. It means it's higher quality because they're already on that path. The nature and understanding the environment. So for me, getting out, and we spent the first couple of months of the year still in Costa Rica and building community though. Now it's not about like going to a different place necessarily. We had that season, but now going back to a similar place where we can build community and people are living kind of that alternative lifestyle, and a place we can go back to is really important to us. But I spent time living in Jerusalem and in Israel as well. So I do enjoy the heat and that culture, and the cold definitely wears on you. And you don't have access to the farmers markets, but certainly now as we get into summer, farmers markets are opening up. Buying local produce is a high priority of just like the day to day and what's stocked in the fridge and what's easy access and kind of our go-tos. And it starts at a young age. Even for our daughter, her first food was bone marrow. And so she'll eat my chopped liver and onions that I make out of
That's so
out of the
amazing.
liver. And so she'll eat anything, right? She eats what we eat. And from a young age, like that's what she knows. And it's, I think, really helped her in her development and just fueling up naturally. But also mindful of, if it's too much travel, or really having that base and building relationships is also really important. But I think that circadian rhythm, and growing up in Chicago, went to school at Northwestern, lived many years in more of a cold climate, even for weeks at a time. Maybe I'd get some sunshine, but for the most part, you don't realize how much that can weigh on you, physically and mentally and emotionally. Just very naturally depressing to not see the sun for 2 months like we were. That's really difficult. And so even getting, having a red light in the house or other ways to supplement, getting or blue light blockers to wear at night, anything to get in that rhythm, especially when your sleep is disrupted by a little one, as the parents out there will know. Your body adjusts though. The human body is very resilient and has been through so much. But it's all about being able to get into the reset and not necessarily draining on if something doesn't go right, but I think just moving forward and putting yourself in a position to feel good day in, day out.
So a lot of parents will kind of use it as the excuse that their life or health fell apart, right? But it seems like the ones who succeed, like you, Jon, are the ones who really use it as the reason, right? Or it's Of course, not easy, really for anyone, but especially parents. But it's like getting locked in with your own uh, like grooves in your habits and your own routines and that sort of thing that allows you to link up in your brain and be like, oh, this is good for me. It feels good too. And on top of that, it's really now a responsibility to be healthy so that you're there and capable for the people around you to provide for them and take care of them and that sort of thing, right? And be a true friend and family member.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's that investment in yourself that then can pay off and be there to support others when they need it. Because they otherwise, and even you can, as you get a little bit older, as like I tried helping to lift a couch and pulled out my back, and I'm like, oh,
Right.
why did I do that? Like I'm starting to feel the age a little bit, but like over time, okay, did some stretching, maybe don't push it too much, and now it comes back, right? Like the body's very resilient, but certainly as we age too, the motions and different actions that we take, it's important to build in the lifting and the quick motion. And for me, running in the sand like barefoot is a big one. Being able to just run on the beach and hop in the ocean, like it's going to be a good day if you see the sunset and and have the ocean. But obviously here in Chicago, we don't have access to that. But maybe now in the summertime, or go do a cold plunge, jump in Lake Michigan. Wherever you are, there's some hope, it's going to be some aspect of nature. Maybe you have to head a little further out from suburbia. And even, in Austin, we don't have big mountains or oceans, but we had Lady Bird Lake and trails, and then certainly the heat to kind of push yourself. But too hot in the summer and getting out of the heat also feels better. So there's no
Yeah.
like perfect climate, right? But we're really fortunate, I think, to be living in this time that was foreseen in, I don't know if you've read the book, The Sovereign Individual, that was written in the late 90s, that saw in the future of digital nomadism and cryptocurrency and all the things that we're experiencing now day in, day out. It really becomes like this mantra of go where you're treated best, right? Each jurisdiction has different laws and taxes and whatnot, even within the US or outside in other countries. But we have this ability to earn a living wherever you are and create value and have this flexibility where you just maybe need a connection to the internet, or you need your Bitcoin wallet, or you have 12 words in your head and go anywhere in the world and have your value stored up and be able to convert into a local currency if you can't find a vendor to accept your Bitcoin. But we're seeing that adoption happening globally, which has always been really inspiring for me, and big reason why now coming back to Chicago, I'm planting a physical flag here and building more of the Bitcoin community here.
Maybe you can talk a little bit more about what Bitcoin community and circular economy and the implications of using Lightning invoices and all of that sort of thing might be for people who aren't as familiar. Like you and I have visited some of these places and feel the vibe, and it is absolutely incredible. But it doesn't even matter like which example you use across the globe, but I'm sure you have many. Can you explain what that is, what it looks like and feels like?
Yeah, absolutely. And Bitcoin is peer-to-peer cash, right? In the white paper, and you can transact with anyone else around the world, and that's settled. Every block, on average, comes in 10 minutes, and that transactions are mined into the block, and that eventually gets set in stone, and that can't be changed, right? And so for everyday commerce for a long time, people were like, well, we need faster transactions, right? And so Bitcoin has really grown in these layers. And the Lightning Network is a layer two, where you still have, you basically open up a channel with another business or another individual, and it's like running a tab. And eventually you settle up back on chain. And as Lightning has continued to grow and the infrastructure has gotten there, there are many nodes that are now routing these payments. And there's actually a lot of privacy baked into the way that Lightning works in payments, whereas Bitcoin is open ledger, right? It's public. It's not necessarily private. It's more pseudonymous. You can maybe link certain addresses and wallets and sizes. Lightning is even a lot more private, and you can settle transactions at the speed of light and for a fraction of a penny cost, right? And there's a real transaction fee that's included on chain, and then those transaction fees are even lower on the Lightning Network. So what that enables you now, and as the infrastructure has continued to really develop, is transact with anyone else that has a Bitcoin or Lightning wallet on the receiver end that's a merchant, maybe with a POS system, and the apps and tools look different in different countries, but ultimately every transaction is being settled on the Bitcoin network or through Lightning. And we don't need to go to an ATM. We don't need to suffer from exchange rates. Those remittances don't need to be robbed of 20 and 30% of their value for a loved one that's sending money back to another country and where they're able to earn more. And I've experienced that, as you mentioned, and for the first time was in El Salvador in November of 2021, shortly after they made Bitcoin legal tender. My wife was leading a retreat in Costa Rica, and so we hopped up to El Salvador just to see the vibe, and yeah, it was incredible. And meeting other Bitcoiners building in the space and going to El Zonte, where they started building more of this circular economy, where merchants are set up with a Lightning wallet and could accept payments for whatever good and service. And then what that does is also lower the transaction fees, right? So instead of paying 3%, or in other countries, maybe 4 or 5 or more percent to Visa or MasterCard to settle credit card transactions, which takes 30 days on the back end, and there's chargebacks and other issues, you can get instant settlement right at the speed of light for a really low cost. And that can be very transformative for a business to then also market and have other Bitcoiners who have that value to spend. And so a couple of months after that, we were going to a wedding in South Africa, and then got COVID there. We were fine, but we had to stay a lot longer. It was when everyone was like, don't go to South Africa, there's Omicron and all this stuff. And so other countries, though, weren't letting you in unless you'd kind of hung out for another couple of weeks. So we ended up road tripping all the way to Tsitsikamma along the southern coast and back. And we made a stop along the way. And I'm very proud to be the first Bitcoiner visitor at Bitcoin Akasi, which is a community in Mussel Bay, poorer township, post-apartheid, that is similar to El Zonte, using surfing and waves as education base. So there are surf instructors or teenagers that are getting paid in Bitcoin, and then they're going around and they want to spend at the spaza at the shop. And so they onboarded a lot of merchants. So then a couple months later, here I am with my Lightning wallet, and I could buy water or snack or whatever from the local shop, and I didn't have to go in and out of Rand. I could just pay right there and settle and pay in Bitcoin. And so these experiences, certainly you can be in Argentina, where the money is broken, hyperinflated 7 times since they instituted a central bank in the 1930s, right? People have experienced this real loss of your value, way more than what we've seen in the US, right? Like, so in Zimbabwe, where they had hyperinflation in 2008, and we went on a safari there, and the guide, Mike, he's amazing, and he understood Bitcoin right away, right? So by the end, I tipped him in Bitcoin, and you see that you can just transact peer-to-peer, right, without a middleman, without a third party needing to settle that transaction, becomes very, very powerful. And particularly for folks that have had their savings wiped away overnight by a government decision to devalue the currency and maybe make their exports more attractive, and this whole fiat currency game where we still have 150 different fiat currencies in the world. It just doesn't, in our interconnected nature as well, we kind of have this decision. You see central bank digital currencies or other kind of cryptos, or I'll call them shitcoins, right? It's like there's someone that's running the ledger. There's some centralization. There's nothing else like Bitcoin that's decentralized, and we're really discovering digital scarcity for the first time. And when you get outside the US bubble and you see even places like Costa Rica, it's amazing to see Bitcoin Jungle and Uvita. They've seen like 90% of the merchants at the farmers market accept Bitcoin. And they just had a documentary come out, Hummingbird. It tells a lot of the story of the circular economy there. But it's super easy. It's 2 clicks, and you download the Bitcoin Jungle app, and Bull Bitcoin has built an integration with ScenePay, which is their local kind of Venmo. So if you want to, even as a merchant, accept Bitcoin and convert it into colones, you can do that, right? That's the freedom of choice. As a merchant, you can decide, and as you kind of have to manage multiple currencies now, what is the split that you want as a business? Anything you can have as longer term savings, you probably want to keep in Bitcoin, especially if it's a lower percent of your transaction volume. Keep it in Bitcoin. If you need some local currency then to pay your own vendors and your bills, well, then there's tools to convert even at the speed at the point of sale. And Square turning on Bitcoin payments for millions of merchants in the US. I mean, these are huge. There's huge footprints, and now vendors that can take 2 clicks on their admin panel and accept Bitcoin. But we're still seeing resistance of adoption, right? Like, we can make it as easy as possible, and that's where you see kind of the UX, the user experience, and the way that the apps work, there's a little bit of onboarding there and continued improvement and design to make it kind of on par with what we've experienced with more of the centralized uh, interface that we've had. Um, but that's, yeah, experiencing that and meeting other people, just having those conversations. I mean, you realize that's the future, it's where we're heading, and we can make it a reality if we choose to, right? If we transact in Bitcoin, and we find vendors that, again, merchants that whatever they're providing, whether it's wine or soap or beef or olive oil, or consulting or whatever you do, or music, whatever you're providing that's of value, you can now just exchange money for it over the internet at the speed of light, and not necessarily need all of the information and KYC and everything else that comes along. Even the friction of making micropayments using credit cards online has always been an issue, and fees that happen. So now being able to find people and connect with others in a more decentralized way. Of course, Nostr is where we've also connected, and I think can pair really well with Bitcoin, and where you see Bitcoin adoption, you're starting to also see Nostr adoption in different countries and can take different forms. But yeah, that's at least in my personal experience. And then bringing that, being in a community like Austin, where there's such a density of people building on Bitcoin and Lightning. And the beauty of an open protocol and open network is that anybody can build on it, and then those solutions and tools are interoperable. So it doesn't matter what wallet I was using when I paid in South Africa and in Bitcoin Akasi, the Spaza and the shop. All they cared about is, hey, here's a QR code or an invoice or tap to pay now, NFC, however you want to transfer that data. But ultimately, I'm sending you Bitcoin and removing the middleman from that process.
Let's talk about the implications of owning your own health records and sovereignty in this space. And we can talk about the Nostr integration that I know you have in the works too. But why is that important? How is that different? And what could the future look like there?
Yeah. Having a background in the healthcare industry, did strategy consulting for health systems, worked in the Medicaid business, was in medical supplies, and just personally, experiencing healthcare, you see how disparate your records are. They're on PDF files all over the place. They're in someone else's server. 1 in 3 Americans' health data gets hacked. In every year, it's sold off without your consent, or we don't have privacy over some of the most intimate data, or even understanding of our own data over time from a longitudinal perspective, right, of comparing labs or other key metabolic metrics that you might want to track that are important for you to know, how you're feeling. And there was a lot of hype like 10 years ago around blockchain for healthcare, and we're going to have all the the records on a blockchain. But that doesn't really make sense, right? Blockchain makes sense for money, which is Bitcoin, as an open ledger. But you want your records, your health records, to be private, and you want to be in control of them, and you want to be able to share them with who you wish, whether that be a loved one or a doctor. And so I believe Bitcoin can pair then really well with Nostr, and Nostr can serve this role where people thought blockchain might, because it's a system where, again, it's an open protocol that uses cryptography, so public-private key cryptography. So instead of getting a public-private key pair that proves to everybody that's your money, you get a public-private key pair to sign events and to save data in an encrypted way that only you can unlock with your private key, your NSEC, and then people can find you with your public key, your NPUB. And we're still pretty early days, I'd say, moving that over. That's like a $30 billion market in of itself. And people see the big boys such as Epic and Cerner, now bought by Oracle, right, that are United Healthcare, Optum. There's big companies controlling health records. But something that we're starting to do at Sound HSA is, and from day one, we had a Nostr integration on our mobile app, is you can save your step data to Nostr. And Nostr stands for notes and other stuff transmitted by relay. A relay is just a server, right? So it could be our server, and that data is still now encrypted to your private key, even though it's saved on our server. So we don't necessarily see it, right? But you could decide to share it, say if you want to earn sats for steps and improve those steps, which is something that we're due with our move to earn. But you could decide to ultimately save it to your own relay and run, if you're running a home server or running another relay, maybe it's a few bucks a month, right? And you want to have that relay, it's a little more technically involved, but not very difficult. You could save it to your own relay, your doctor's relay, and then choose to share it with who you wish. And so by default, it's actually private versus by default having it sit in someone's central repository that thousands of people have access to. And if someone gets phished and hacked, and then that gets, we know the story of what's happening to our health data these days. And so it's then building on a network where there are already individuals using it more for, say, social media or other use cases. Something else I'm doing it with my company, Nos Fabrica, is web of trust. And how do you even know who someone is in this decentralized world? How do I know that Abel is this is the real Abel account that I should be interacting with? Well, we can do it based on follows, mutes, and reports. So based on 1 hop away, 2 hops away, all the way from your personal view of the network, all these things are public and signed events of who follows who and who's muted and reported who. And it's not tied to one platform. So like where musicians might have a challenge of I'm growing my YouTube following, but I can't bring that to Spotify and I'm only earning a certain amount on one of those 2 platforms, you can bring this public record of who's following me and where's my community, and even exploration and discovering others to different apps and different interfaces and different use cases, and earn Bitcoin, get zaps, right? With in our value for value ecosystem. So I think that's where we started, certainly with music, and you see a lot of great use cases there. To start on the social side, I do think from coming back to health and healthcare, there's a massive opportunity and really just a big brokenness of the healthcare system, but that's driven from individuals that are not really the decision maker and the driver of their own health. One, because they're probably not paying for it. 90% of healthcare is paid by a third party, or whether that's insurance or government. And then that record is being held in multiple different places, and there's no way to really track these things over time. So I think as we continue to build, on Nostr, it provides this avenue and just, again, a protocol, an open protocol that other people can build on and modify. And ultimately you need some alignment, but we have a way of saving FHIR, FHIR, HL7 is like an international standard for how healthcare data is saved, right? We can save that onto Nostr, and the challenge is bringing the old records on. I think when you start from today and save things moving forward to Nostr, that's a lot easier, but ultimately that's a big lift and something that other people are working on at the individual level, at the clinician level. And so then the beauty of that is not everybody needs to build everything, right? You don't need to have this one massive centralized place like Epic that everybody now wants to attach into and, connect APIs and this and that. Ultimately, there's still gatekeepers there. So it's just a totally different architecture to have this decentralized way of interacting with others, but you can be in control of ultimately where that data is saved, bringing it with you wherever you go around the world, and making that accessible, right? If as you're traveling, or if some emergency happens and you need to look up a previous record, that's very difficult to do right now. So we have ways now and tools that are being built where I can save my record here on Nostr and maybe have a doctor scan a QR and say, yeah, go ahead, I want you to read my health record to save my life, or do whatever needs to be done. And versus maybe not even being able to get access to that today.
Now, let's talk about incentives a little bit. How are you getting those more aligned than they are in the current system with what you're building at Sound HSA and some of the other projects you've been involved in?
Yeah, absolutely. So incentives in healthcare are very perverse right now, and ultimately the crux of that in the U.S. at least is that you have a payer and a consumer and then a provider of healthcare in this triangle that are removed, and they're ultimately trying to pool the health and financial risk of the population. But when the payer is different than the consumer, you end up with a whole host of issues, basically information asymmetry, right? The patient ultimately knows more about their own body than the doctor, the insurance company. The insurance company is the one telling the doctor what will or won't get paid for, right? The doctor in a fee-for-service environment is going to want to bill more, do more images, more tests, squeeze more into the day to get paid more, right? Supplier-induced demand, moral hazard on the patient side. So there's all these things, fraud, waste, and abuse that are happening when you have this kind of triangle. If you merge the payer and the consumer of healthcare, and we have this value for value relationship, and all of a sudden you're a customer of, and you actually ask the price and you get to know what this thing in healthcare is going to cost. There is a real cost to it. We can align incentives a lot further. And so ultimately the price of healthcare has gone up and outpaced inflation. The general inflation in the population, it's gone up about 250% since the early 2000s over time. And that outpaces all other industries. And it's now almost taking up 20% of our economy. So $5.5 trillion a year is being spent on healthcare, a quarter of every year. A quarter of that's administrative, half of that's just straight up waste. And pre-fiat, when Medicare and Medicaid were instantiated in 1965, 60 to 70% of all healthcare payments were out of pocket by an individual, self-pay. Today, that's only 10% of payment is self-pay, but that bucket is $550 billion. So there's still a lot that's being spent out of pocket, despite everything else going on in the other $5 trillion. And so really with Sound HSA, what we're doing to align incentives is enabling individuals to hold real Bitcoin within the triple tax advantage health savings account product, right? So this is something that's existed in the US tax code since 2003, where the one kind of drag though, you still need to have a high deductible health plan. So if you have health insurance, you can save tax deductible on the way in, tax-free gains on whatever's being held within the HSA, and then tax-free when you spend it on eligible health and medical goods and services, which that bucket also keeps expanding. Like you can go and get a letter of medical necessity from a company like TrueMed and buy your Force of Nature beef with your HSA today, right? Or now you can have a relationship with a doctor in direct primary care. That's eligible for your HSA, spending maybe $100 a month on a doctor-patient relationship. And so this is an existing market. There's almost 40 million accounts holding almost $200 billion in value, and over half of that's sitting in cash. It's not even being invested. Some HSAs will let you invest in stocks or mutual funds, or if you self-direct, there are people we know who've actually held cattle in their HSA. You can kind of have anything. It needs to, they're very clever people out there, right? And so it needs to be cash on the way in, but then you can invest in our program now, in our product, you can buy Bitcoin, and then that Bitcoin is being held in a multi-institutional multi-sig, right? So as we talk about custody in Bitcoin and holding your own keys, that's really important to us as well. And so we partnered with Horizon Trust, which is in New Mexico, Gannett Trust, a Bitcoin native trust company out of Wyoming, and then Unchained Capital out of Austin, Texas. Each of them are holding a key. And so boom, we have real Bitcoin. This isn't an ETF. It's not a stock, right? It's real Bitcoin, which then the next step is going to be enabling people to pay in Bitcoin. Because while you have to contribute in dollars, you can distribute in Bitcoin. And so now paying for HSA eligible goods and services, you don't have to worry about capital gains taxes, right? Bitcoin has been treated as property since 2014, not money. Even though it's money in another country, right? You don't have to pay capital gains if the dollar strengthens against the yen, as it's been happening now, because the yen is deeper sovereign debt issues, right? And kind of further along this fiat path, and even than we are, it's treated as property. But within the HSA, I think coming back to the Bitcoin circular economy, we have a huge opportunity now for people to be able to hold their own value, spend it on something in health that's going to benefit them or their family, and even more on the preventative side, right? So it's not just the hospital or surgery bill. Sure, if you have a bigger one, great. Like you can spend with your HSA. But one of the things you can do is pay out of pocket now, hold that for a health good or service, hold your receipt, and then reimburse yourself at any point into the future, tax-free. So you buy your contacts this year, you don't necessarily have to reimburse yourself out of your HSA right away. I can reimburse myself in 20 years for contacts I bought this year. And then instead of paying $800 or a million sats now, how many sats is that going to be in 20 years? Is it only 100,000 sats, 200,000 sats, right? So there's kind of this a little bit of arbitrage, honestly, but by using Bitcoin as our unit of account for a long-term time horizon, that's where Bitcoin truly becomes, and I see it as health savings technology, right? It really affords us now not only the ability to have the time to take care of ourselves, but ultimately spend it on a pretty wide bucket of goods and services that insurance definitely is not paying for, right? Insurance traditionally doesn't pay for chiropractors or naturopaths or other alternative quote unquote medicine, right? And health. But a lot of that is all HSA eligible. You can buy your sauna, you can buy red light glasses, right? Your beef. There's a whole host of products that, again, as we learn more and get more data on ourselves and more clinicians are realizing and understanding how important all these inputs are to our health, that angle and what's going to benefit you today is becoming, I think, more tangible. So that's where, I think the incentive now is ultimately with the individual to think about the price, but also think about, here's my savings for myself and my family. I'm not necessarily going to rely on Medicare to hopefully pay for my new hip or knee in 30, 40 years, like they paid for the hips and knees of my parents and grandparents. Like they're straight up, it's running, if the trust fund runs out of money, scheduled in 2033. And then of course they can print more money and there can be more dollars in the Medicare's bank account. But what kind of quality service now is that going to buy you? And how long are you going to have to wait to get your surgery, right? And so that system that we're seeing is really unsustainable. And you have this death spiral as well of insurance, whereas premiums go up and the population also gets sicker to have to cover that, the younger, healthier people opt out, and that forces premiums to continue to go up. And ultimately, it kind of falls apart, right? And there's a role for insurance originally, but insurance has gotten so big and massive in healthcare, right? And for your car insurance, you don't expect your car insurance to pay for your oil change, right? There's a price for that. It's a commodity. You go and do that. But in healthcare, people have come to expect their insurance to pay for a primary care visit once a year to check in on your health. And you get, on average, 7 minutes to spend with your doctor. They don't know you. They don't know your lifestyle, your habits, so you're not really going to find a solution, right? Especially if something really is wrong in that scenario. And that's where even other business models, where I've worked a lot in helping doctors and dentists integrate a Bitcoin strategy over the last few years, accepting Bitcoin for payment. They have a business model now that aligns with Bitcoin because they're creating this direct relationship with their customer. So direct primary care is a great example, or concierge medicine, even dental that's often excluded or have separate insurance. You have some kind of out-of-pocket expense that's expected there. So those merchants now are accepting Bitcoin and they're really lowering their transaction fees. So coming back to the electronic medical records that we were speaking about and the centralization there, that system, the EMR and billing systems takes 6 to 10% of every healthcare transaction goes to software and middlemen, processors, basically, right? So and a lot of healthcare businesses often have lower margins. So that savings can be pretty substantial if you start to shift it towards Bitcoin, which now can bring your transaction fee to basically 0%, and the consumer is actually paying the transaction fee, right, to the miners. Or you can use a service and maybe you pay up to 1% to kind of make it really easy for you to accept Bitcoin. And still, you're saving several percent on that transaction. So while it's certainly a philosophical mission, I would say, and kind of seeing more Bitcoin adoption, it's not a zero-sum game. It benefits everybody. But there is that business perspective where you can, if you want to increase your bottom line, and then you also want to now attract a consumer that has value to spend on whatever good or service you're providing, it creates this, just this free market economy that's way more powerful, in my opinion, to operate, right, than a centralized system that will never know you or your family's needs as intimately as you do.
For sure. Why don't you talk as well about Sats for Steps and some of those like fun challenges that get people involved in the real world in a real way that the traditional system just doesn't do?
Yeah, absolutely. You've seen corporate wellness and other initiatives try to take off over the last few years. And ultimately, employers want to see their employees moving their bodies, right? Being healthier, getting their steps in throughout the day. You'll be more engaged. And especially as we have more online interactions or Zoom calls, that's important. And so what we've enabled from early on last year's Vegas in 2025 and from Sound HSA is move to earn. So we were paying out sats for steps for certain global step challenges. So it said, hey, if you walk 50,000 steps this week, we'll send you 10,000 sats. And so we've paid out more than 10 million sats at this point globally. So more than 5,000 people have used the app. We have people in Nigeria and in Australia and UK, all over, that can use the app, right? This is separate from the regulated HSA product where you have to be in the US and so on. So that's really been global in nature from day one. We use Noster for identity. So you don't even necessarily give us your name. It's just, hey, here's my NPUB and here's a Lightning address. Here's how I can pay you. We now have a non-custodial Lightning wallet powered by the Breeze SDK that's in our app. So some of the feedback we got is, hey, I want to do this, but I don't know where to get a Lightning address or Lightning wallet. And now we can offer that directly within our experience. So for companies that want to offer, we've had a doctor in Houston offering that same the 10,000 steps sats a week for 50,000 steps to his clinicians and employees. Take it a step further, then we think there's a lot of opportunity for whatever you want to incentivize, or maybe it's blood pressure, blood glucose, or anything else, A1C, whatever you want to track that's going to be important for a coach or a clinician with your customer or patient. You can incentivize, right, and move. And we know how important and powerful incentives are in being able to earn money, or even just holding yourself accountable, right? If you pay for something, kind of like, oh, I need to use this, I want to, make it worth what I spent, rather than something just being free or getting an Amazon gift card or something else that's like, whatever, I don't need more crap. But here's now you can earn real Bitcoin through the program that we're offering. And so, I think it's been a fun way to engage and kind of spread the word about what we're doing. But we'd love to see if there's other, if there's doctors or if there's companies that want to start offering this to more of their people. Certainly something we can offer, and it's a matter of, what's going to move the needle. And certainly there's studies, more recently have shown it's not even, there's sort of that magic number of 10,000 steps a day, but you don't even need 10,000 steps. It's really more like even 5, 6, 7,000 steps a day, right? Like you really have gone on a walk or done something to move your body more than 1,000 or 2,000 a day. That significantly lowers all-cause mortality, like up to 40%, right? The Lancet had a recent study there, kind of meta-analysis. So I think anyone that's moved their body or stepped, it's very clear, it's very universal. We're all human. So that's something that we've started with and then could enable through the pedometer on the phone. And so Apple limits it to so we're actually not even connected to Apple Health at this point. We could, but in Apple Health, you can just manually click plus and add your steps.
Yeah.
So that's not, if we're going to dish out real money, we want a little bit of proof of work. So when you hit complete, we actually are pulling that data from the pedometer on the phone to kind of verify and then say, yep, that you've completed the step count and get your sats. And so with Noster now, what that does is extend the time frame. So instead of only having that 7 to 10 day window, we can save it for however long a time period you want, right? And so we built that mechanism under this NIP 456 to save more longitudinal data to Noster and in the right format, really, right? It's JSON, it's kind of the simple notes, but and of course it exists in the centralized world. The databases are holding this type of data, but for us, it's how can we do it in a way that ultimately then gives the individual the opportunity to own this data? Because if you own the data and then you own the outcome and it's yours and you're taking personal responsibility, I believe then we're going to have way better and healthier and better outcomes and healthier population overall.
Definitely. So kudos to you, man, for doing the work that you do in so many ways. So before we go, why don't you tell folks where they can find you and some of your projects, from the in-person ones to Sound HSA?
Yeah, so for Sound, you can go to soundhsa.com, open up an account. We're really excited to be welcoming individuals and then having conversations with companies that want to integrate with payroll and benefits and so on. Nosfabrica.com is another one if you want to dig into Noster in this world of Web of Trust. Maybe you're a creator or musician like Abel, want to start earning some sats, building your audience there. Happy to chat. And then, in Chicago, I'm helping to launch the Fork and Coin restaurant and the Chicago Bitcoin Collective. We have over 40 members already of our kind of clubhouse hackerspace, and our restaurant will be opening up over the summer seed oil free, healthy food, a little bit of New American, Asian twist. So if you're in Chicago, definitely come by Portage Park, which is where we have the restaurant. And yeah, I'm the Bitcoin Yogi on X and Nostr. Always happy to connect and chat and talk all things Bitcoin, Nostr, and health. So yeah, really appreciate you having me, Abel. It's always been an inspiration for me to see everything you've done in your career, all over from the wild diet to music and podcasting and writing and so on. And so I think it's just awesome to see that message then spread and reach more of where you've made an impact already, and bringing Bitcoin and a big part and having it click for you. And I think it's no surprise then that we've continued to bump into each other and connect over the last few years since we originally met, because that's usually where the fun's going to be had, right? We're having streaming sats and let's listen to you jam out in Vegas, or now here in Chicago. We're planning the next Value for Value event. So well, I'm sure I'll be seeing you again soon.
I'm stoked. Yeah, I can't wait to see you in Chicago and all the other places. So thank you so much for taking the time today, Jon.
Thanks, Abel.
Hey, Abel here one more time. And if you believe in our mission to create a world where health is the norm, not sickness, here are a few things you can do to help keep this show coming your way. Click like, subscribe, and leave a quick review wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts. You can also subscribe to my new Substack channel for an ad-free version of this show in video and audio. That's at abeljames.substack.com. You can also find me on Twitter or X, YouTube, as well as Fountain FM, where you can leave a little crypto in the tip jar. And if you can think of someone you care about who might learn from or enjoy this show, please take a quick moment to share it with them. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.